freedom. We need freedom. Oh yes, I want freedom. I want freedom. Have a purpose in all you do. Just make sure that your purpose is true. Have a purpose in this here life, so your life ain't full of strife. Live a purpose each and every day, so we can live in joy. I have a purpose in all you do. Just make sure your life is true. And greetings, Hotep, and welcome yet again to another live broadcast of AST Speaks, Queen Mother Dr. as well as ANULegacy. And we get an opportunity tonight to really go a little bit deeper in different conversations. We won't just call them conversations because we're not trying to con anyone, and we're definitely taking English into another realm, if you will. Because tonight we would like to be able to share with our listeners and our viewers, AST Speaks Building a New Legacy. What is that? Interdisciplinary, transcultural, diverse, holistic, and inclusive media broadcast sharing ankhversations. Why did I say ankhversations? Life, this language just a bit. So when you hear us say ankhversations, we're just speaking of life-centered ways that we reason. How do we talk about the actions we're involved in? How do we share our perspectives respectfully, yet firmly, based on the knowledge, the wisdom, the teachings that we've been exposed to? And again, talking about things from a global perspective, speaking about things in terms of movements, initiatives, actionable deliverables right here in the Virgin Islands, in the Caribbean Americas, throughout the Western Hemisphere, Europe, Eurasia, make sure I include Pacific Islands, big around balance within the British realm, as well as speaking of the Caribbean. And we speak of the Caribbean, south of Florida, all the way to Suriname, French Guiana, Guyana, etc. Right? And all of those spaces within the Caribbean Sea and a little bit of the Atlantic, etc. And tonight we are going to be joined again by a returning guest. If we keep this up, we'll be co-hosts. And that is none other than Dr. Edward L. Browne. Welcome again for returning to AST Speaks.
Good evening, Dr. Chen. Thank you so much. I think we're having a little, streaming issue like we talked about in the beginning, but we'll work through it.
Building a new legacy. And I want to just continue to I have to find humor. Yeah, I have to find humor because we haven't even gotten to the heat part yet. So
no, we talked about that, right?
Hopefully the services will stay centered and focused. Yes. We're right here in St. Croix, St. Croix, Virgin Island. Some people in quotation marks, America's paradise. Global Crossing is up the road.
Yep.
Soft humor on my side. Breathe deep.
Yes.
Dr. Edward L. Browne was born on the island of St. Croix in the Virgin Islands of the United States. Dr. Browne obtained degrees in psychology, including a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts from the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, Colorado. Dr. Browne obtained a Doctor of Education in Counseling Psychology from Argosy University, Sarasota campus. Dr. Browne has spoken at the United Nations Fourth Committee on topics to include decolonization and self-determination. Dr. Edward L. Browne is a nationally certified counselor employed as a school counselor by the Virgin Islands Department of Education. Dr. Browne is the immediate past president of the American Counseling Association of the Virgin Islands. Dr. Browne is passionate about the history of the Virgin Islands and has given numerous presentations, lectures on the transfer of the Danish West India Islands from Denmark to the United States. For those that don't know the time frame, March 31st, 1917, formal exchange, August 1916. But let me continue. And Dr. Browne loves walking and spending time with family members and friends. So again, we'd like to welcome Dr. Edward L. Browne as we get through some targeted discussion.
Hello, Dr. Chen.
Conversation moving forward, because it seems that there's forces that do not. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you know, the forces that we talked about it, you know what I'm saying? These things always happen, it seems like, when we're having these types of discussions in the Virgin Islands. I'm not sure why, but it always happens.
So that's why I'm putting out all the questions and you keep talking. And you
Okay,
keep
no
moving.
problem.
As long as it works, then I just need the people to get the information. So first and foremost, I'm very appreciative for you being able to make some time to join us tonight.
Sure.
And I'd like to start with this, some of your perspectives on the relationship of the Virgin Islands, US, with the United States. And I want to just give some context. Part of what we said would be our broadcast title is, are Virgin Islanders afraid of free association or independence? Say that one more time. Are Virgin Islanders afraid of free association or independence? And our whole idea this evening is to really speak around Virgin Islands of the United States and the current federal relationship we have with the United States of America, which is as a non-incorporated, non-self-governing territory of the United States of America. And that's been the status from 1917, from the transfer. And then to speak to some issues around what is free association, what is independence, what is this statehood that has never been afforded to the Virgin Islands of the US? How does this relate to human rights? How does it relate to citizenship? And I'd like you to just keep the conversation going regardless of what's happening on my end. And we're starting with just, what are your perspectives on the relationship the Virgin Islands of the United States has with the US?
Okay. Thank you again, Dr. Chen, for the opportunity. I know you did say you would invite me again back to talk about status and some of these other issues, our constitutional convention, and so many different things have happened since our first discussion. How I view the relationship between the United States and the Virgin Islands of the United States. There's no formal legal U.S. Virgin Islands. That's not the proper terminology. That's used as like a tourism-based title. The proper title is the Virgin Islands of the United States. And our relationship with the U.S. is very colonial. And even the U.S. government recognizes that it is colonial. The Virgin Islands of the United States is an unincorporated territory of the United States, and that was established through the Revised Organic Act of 1954 as amended, where that explicit language was outlined in a federal document. Of course, as you mentioned, you had the insular cases in the early 1900s, and the insular cases, what came out of that was a judicial opinion by the justices at that time in the Supreme Court, that in their opinion, that the United States could go along the pathway of incorporated and unincorporated. At the time, Before that, most territories that became a part of the United States would eventually become incorporated and eventually become states. And a good example of that would be Alaska, the 49th state, and Hawaii became the 50th state. However, in reference to Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, Northern Mariana, and the Virgin Islands of the United States, we are unincorporated territories. Puerto Rico and the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas are classified as commonwealths, and then you have the other unincorporated territories, but it means the same thing in reference to not having full constitutional citizenship. And so what does that mean? Quickly, full constitutional citizenship means that you get the right to vote for the president, the vice president, you get all of the federal programs, you have the right to two US senators, you also have the right to a delegate to Congress or a resident commissioner with full voting privileges. Our current delegate to Congress, Delegate Stacey Plaskett, she has limited voting privileges within the House of Representatives. She does vote in committee, but she doesn't vote on the full floor. And so when you combine all of that, we are at a huge disadvantage, even though there are those who say, wow, you guys get all of this federal money. At the end of the day, our human rights are being violated, our right to self-determination, because the United States is a one of a few nations. I really don't know of any other nation. I've been looking to see how many nations have statutory citizenship and constitutional citizenship like the US, and I've only found the US has that in place, where Congress decides the fate of those of us in the unincorporated territories, and then those on the mainland who are incorporated get all the rights and privileges under constitutional citizenship.
Thank you so much for that very engaging response, because it lets us add some context to what we're speaking to, so persons understand that even through the United Nations, there was an option in the late 50s and the early 60s to pretty much so implement decolonization globally.
Right.
And that included the Virgin Islands of the United States, among other former colonies, territories, commonwealths. And from 58 to 63, very little happened. And although there were other parts of the Caribbean, Central and South America, other parts of the continent, there was a significant, number of independence movements. Yeah. Certain countries became, fully independent or had republic status, etc. But the Virgin Islands, in its strategic location, remains as a unincorporated, non-self-governing territory of the United States of America, following, even in certain instances, trade transport laws that still are tied to the Danish crown, and inclusive of the US. So we'll come back to that. So thank you for that clarity. So why are free association and independence issues of value to the Virgin Islands of the United States, Dr. Browne?
It should be, because when you look at, again, full constitutional citizenship, right now under the US structure, there's two: statehood, or the people of the Virgin Islands decide to join a state and become a county of that state. That's it. There's, you might hear folks talk about, we could develop hybrid systems. That's not going to grant. If you're not going to be granted full constitutional citizenship, that's just a declaration. There is only on two sides of it in reference to the US, statehood and joining a state. And if we decide to move away from the US, which the US has already declared us to be an unincorporated territory, so they're saying as of right now, we're not going to incorporate you. So these two options are off the table. It's just logical. You're not incorporated, then it's free association or independence. And free association, what free association is all about, if you go out in the Pacific, for example, the Republic of Palau, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, these were trust territories at one point, and then the United Nations and the US said that they were going to manage them for a period of time. And then in the 1980s, it was in 1985, Palau, Marshall Islands, and the Federated States of Micronesia, they decided they did not want to seek a closer relationship with the US. And they are now in a compact with the United States. I think this is the third one that they're in, where they have a relationship where they negotiate certain areas with the United States, such as defense, such as trade, other areas that they negotiate in a discussion, in a compact, and the United States provide them federal assistance with education, with wastewater, all of the things that they do here with the United States, with the Virgin Islands of the United States. To a lesser degree, yes, but they still provide those federal funds, and they take care of defense, and to some aspect as well, foreign affairs. And so the Virgin Islands of the United States and Virgin Islanders need to pay attention to that, because in my opinion, that's what the United States is kind of doing to us these last 2 or 3 years. They're more and more saying, we will partner with you guys, we will help you guys, but we're not coming in to do for you. We're not going to come in and take over your government and do for you. However, if you don't follow the federal laws, yeah, you could still end up in jail. So, keep that in mind. So my attitude and my approach is, well, if you're not going to incorporate us and give us all the rights and privileges, whether through statehood or if the people of the Virgin Islands want to join a state as a county, then we really need to have a discussion and dialogue about how free association would look, or independence as well. If you don't mind me real quick, Dr. Chen, to say there's a lot of fear in the territory. Because every time we begin to talk about independence, there's almost always a silence. And then when I engage with folks, they're like, even though you're a free association, what would independence look like? And we won't get the help. And what would happen? Like Hurricane Beryl just came through and devastated some of the Caribbean islands. What would happen to the Virgin Islands? We don't export. All of these aren't really relevant issues if you really look at it, because there's an international community. And you look at Barbados and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the folks down there are already rebuilding. And they might actually rebuild and get stuff done before those of us here in the Virgin Islands after 7 years of Irma and Maria. And we still have a lot of folks who have the blue tarp. Their homes haven't been rebuilt. So the idea that because there's a natural disaster and we're not under the US, we can't get things done, that's false. A lot of nations don't export a lot of goods, and they're still surviving. So that's not an issue. The issue of food, for example, we don't grow our own food. A lot of nations import their food, even the United States. We're right next to the United States. The United States has a long history of importing food as well. It's good for us to grow our own food, yes, but that's not a reason why we cannot be independent. Defense, you just do a bilateral treaty or a multilateral treaty that states that the Virgin Islands, if it's attacked by any foreign power, that the US will come in and assist, or some other nation will assist us in defending these out. There's really no real issue that would stop the Virgin Islands, if the people choose independence, from being able to sustain ourselves, except for us managing our own affairs, our own financial affairs well.
That was put quite eloquently and to the point. I think that the idea of moving beyond fear is really important. I really wanted you to say that portion about that there is no real issue to stop the Virgin Islands from free association or independence. I just want to make sure I heard you right.
Yeah, and for folks who may be listening, I'm not telling you my opinion. I'm telling you this because this is what members of Congress have stated over the decades, because I have access to the congressional records. So I've read almost all of the hearings pertaining to the Virgin Islands, even Guam, American Samoa, the Trust Territories, Puerto Rico. I've read almost most of them. And when it comes to the Virgin Islands, the members of Congress over the decades have said, because of your strategic location and the fact at one time we used to do transshipment, it's almost near impossible for you guys not to make money. And that's the truth. That's why Denmark, Norway, and many of those Scandinavian nations are so wealthy, Dr. Chen. They themselves, Denmark, didn't realize, the value of these islands until after the transfer. And they realized, wait a minute, we're giving up these islands in a strategic location. Maybe we shouldn't really do that. But, the deal was already set. And even the U.S. has never really maximized these islands, because it's the U.S. It's one of the wealthiest nations on the planet. Why would they care to do anything here like that financially? But for us as Virgin Islanders, the sky's the limit because of our strategic location. So there should be no fear. Everyone would want to trade with us, because that's the way it was before the transfer of the islands from Denmark to the US. Everyone traded with people here at that time, mostly the Danes.
Right. And I think it's also important to add, we talk about the building in this community. and health and wellness. People came here to get food, agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
agritourism, agribusiness. People saw St. Croix in particular as a breadbasket.
Yeah.
People came here when they were struggling with consumption, tuberculosis, all types of diseases. It was the retreat space. And even though some people now come here for a different kind of retreat, that has become more of a repeopling of the Virgin Islands in contrast to retreating and leaving the essence of the Virgin Islands as it is. It's shifted significantly in the 21st century. So this goes
Yeah.
to my next question, just in terms of what are some of your perspectives on the relationships that the Virgin Islands of the United States has with CARICOM, the Caribbean community, and other regions throughout the Americas?
Well, that's a great question. And Dr. Chen, I've been advocating for the Virgin Islands to become a full member of CARICOM. I know that there's talk about associated member. I don't understand that associated piece. It's not logical to me. When hurricanes come through, the hurricanes don't say, okay, you know what? We're going to bypass the Virgin Islands and hit the other islands, and we're not going to hit the Virgin Islands. This climate catastrophe that every day we're going through heat waves and some days excessive heat. It's not, all the other islands and the Virgin Islands isn't being impacted. As we talk about the global north and the global south and the conflicts that are now emerging, the Virgin Islands is at the tip of the spear because of our strategic location. We're not separated from the region. We're not separated from our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean. And to say that somehow, because of our current declaration as being unincorporated, that I, as a Virgin Islander living on the island of St. Croix, should stay in a situation where someone who's living in Colorado, in Greeley, Colorado, I love the people in Colorado, love my family out there in Colorado, but those leaders know better for me here in the Virgin Islands in regards to joining with CARICOM. They don't. It's just logical. They're not going through what I'm facing every day, especially with this climate catastrophe that's driving so many of us out of the islands because of these hurricanes and the damage it's doing to crops, to the mango trees. I know you're watching this to so many. The fungi come in and then they just boom because of the heat. It's impacting even our food production now. And what is the US saying about that? Pretty much nothing. It's not a relevant issue day to day to them, but it's to us and those of us in the region. So, I feel it's time for us to have that serious discussion with the US and our status so that we can be a full member of CARICOM, not an associate member, a full member of CARICOM.
And I think that I have to second and third your suggestion exponentially, because it's only through most of our non-governmental organizations, our civil society networks, our nonprofit organizations, and our individual groups and persons working with CARICOM full members that we're able to even have some of our issues of the Virgin Islands of the US put on the table. Even our brothers in the British Virgin Islands they get to engage. So
Right.
we're looking forward to seeing how we can move this a little differently.
And I have to say that the years that I spoke at the UN, a lot of the support that I got in talking about some of the issues with Denmark, it was the members of CARICOM and the African Union and the nations out in the Pacific, the island nations that have supported me the most, in some of the things that I've said in reference to bringing Denmark to the table to have discussions about, reconciliation, reparations, and repatriation. And even just a couple of days ago, I had one of the ambassadors from CARICOM at the UN said, are you going to come back to the Fourth Committee and update us on what's going on? So, that's a decision I have to make and explore. But it just goes to show that they are, members within the UN body that are, and it's not just CARICOM or African Union. There are other nations around the world that that care about the Virgin Islands, care about the 17, non-self-governing territories, especially now New Caledonia, and what's going on in New Caledonia is a big issue for many with the violence out there. So, the more voices at the table, I think is good. So I'll make that decision. If not this year, maybe next year, I'll go back and talk to the good folks at the UN.
I think that there was a number of convenings on decolonization, and I always miss up the countries where these things happen. But what I thought was interesting was that there are a number of efforts in place to address decolonization, repatriation of artifacts, humans to ancestral lands, and more, reparatory justice, reparations. There are a host of apologies that are scheduled to take place in CARICOM nation spaces over the next couple of weeks, specifically around the August 1st emancipation observances in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, Antigua Barbuda, and we can go on and on. Those former British colonies have really placed an anchor on these apologies, and not just apologies for the sake of apology and just a public saying of I'm sorry, but an apology that has teeth, an apology that has substance, an apology that also involves corrective, reparatory actions and justice and the repairing of the relationships. I want to make sure I highlight that. So it's not just persons coming and saying, I'm sorry. It's people apologizing for the wrongs done, even if it was outside of their generational engagement, and establishing forward-thinking, actionable deliverables that we can move forward and restore our humanity collectively. So I think that it's not just the dollars, even though there's some portions that do include money, and I don't, whether it's, I don't like to just say fiat money, but resources, investments, education, healthcare and wellness, building blocks of civilization, agriculture, technology, arts and sciences that govern the universe, cultural and historic preservation. I mean, the list is quite extensive, right? Contributions for entrepreneurship, and definitely technology, climate change. I'm sure they're going to have another term for it. I like using sustainable environments, not environments, but sustainable environments, because as these hurricanes become more devastating, as we were warned since 1989, when Hugo dismantled and destroyed 85% or more of the Virgin Islands of the United States, this was being said way back then. We've heard of staying alive 1.5, net zero emissions, don't go beyond 1.5 Celsius. We've been hearing this for decades. And for some reason, some people actually thought that it was a conspiracy theory. If there really wasn't any climate change and that stuff wasn't melting where it shouldn't melt, things weren't going to get hotter than they've been. Now that we know that that's inaccurate, this is a great time for us to address sustainable environments and to see that in the context of, again, our relationship with one of the most powerful countries on earth. Our relationship with one of the most powerful countries on earth should make our country, the Virgin Islands, within this U.S. space, have uninterrupted power, uninterrupted internet. Did I say it? I'm just saying it with a smile. We should have the top quality of technology, the top quality of entrepreneurship. We should not have an issue with feeding our population of less than 105,000 persons on all 4 islands. Water Island, 2 square miles, St. John, 20 square miles, St. Thomas, 32 square miles, and St. Croix, 84 square miles, inclusive of 2 square miles of submerged lands. I'm just saying there is no reason for this very strategic landmass surrounded by the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean in certain portions, to struggle with some of the basic utilities, services, when we are still within the 100 plus year long realm of the most powerful country, one of the most powerful countries on earth.
Mhm.
Just
Yeah.
needed to say
Well,
that.
Well, Dr. Chen, I had my case in the district court in regards to systematic and systemic historical disparities. Some of the things that you're talking about, what a lot of Virgin Islanders don't know, if you go back in the the congressional record and historical documents that I have, even from banks and all over, even U.S. banks, what we're seeing today, they were talking about in 1906, 1907, how St. Thomas would develop into a passenger destination, which we now know is a cruise ship destination. They really didn't have a plan for St. Croix and St. John, but they understood the demographics and what that would mean and the changes that would take place over time. And then eventually the US would have full control of the strategic location. And these were discussed openly in the 1920s and 1930s. And when I look back to folks, I mean, you can definitely see there's a level of racism in some of the discussions. That's clear. But folks were just comfortable in what they were saying. So they were brutally open and brutally honest. And over the decades, that hasn't happened because, we've had an influx of folks from mainly the other Caribbean islands with similar culture, similar language, similar beliefs. So that hasn't changed. But now, over the last several years, especially since Hurricane Irma and Maria, you're now starting to see the demographic changes and the fact that so many Virgin Islanders between the age group between 18 to 35, like half, have left. So if we had like 34,000 in 2010, we're now down to 17 between 18 to 35 because so many are now left and especially gone to the US or abroad. And so that is creating some demographic issues and gentrification issues. And that's why this discussion is so important to have right now about our relationship to the US, so we can continue, those of us who want to be able to preserve our history, culture, traditions, and values, how we want to use the environment. We have a say, because I'm seeing folks come now into the Virgin Islands and they have no respect for those of us who are native born or those who are long-term residents. They're finding stuff on their property, which they're supposed to call the proper agencies and let them know, hey, I found bones, or I found pottery, and these folks aren't doing that. They're literally collecting it and then sending it other places, or selling it to those, on the highest, for the highest price on the black market. And they think that, so folks like myself don't know that they're doing it, but I do know, and I know who's doing it. But at the end of the day, there are others that need to step up. The government needs to step up and continue to tell folks, you can't do that. We have a territorial park system now. You cannot just come into the Virgin Islands and take what you want and go to give it to the Danes or give it to people in the US and do that kind of stuff. It's just wrong, and it shouldn't be allowed, but it's happening because of gentrification and what that's doing to us as a people.
That's a very good point, because that in of itself speaks volumes to some of the conversations that we've been hosting and exploring in a variety of spaces. So I would like to make sure that I do highlight that in the highest form and in the most respectful manner possible, because it's not easy to have that conversation, especially in these times. And this goes right into it's not even a next question, but it's a layering of the question I just asked. But just what are some of the key human rights matters and crises? I mean, you've identified several that you are actively involved in or believe should be highlighted. You already started with, the case that you have in place in terms of things that are happening here in the Virgin Islands that are violating human rights of Virgin Islanders, in terms of land acquisition. You've made a reference to what people are finding on private lands. And even though in certain parts of the federal law, we've got these protections from the Antiquities Act, but this is very recent, and I will leave the names for those that want to do the research and know the names, but there are persons that have sold property, persons that have acquired property I'll use St. Croix as an example. And persons are finding various valuables, historic
Mm-hmm.
items that should be vetted through an certified, licensed, credentialed archaeologist and other social scientists to make sure that these are not things that are from a heritage period of
Right.
specific note, and especially in light of how the Kingdom of Denmark was able to sell the lands and in many instances the inhabitants and the resources on these
Yes.
lands for $25 million in gold. That was the transaction finalized in August of 1916 and ceremoniously, with the military transfer and the flag exchange on March 31st, 1917. I think it's really important when we talk about these human rights efforts that you have shared that have been violated, and I don't want to just dwell on that part, but I want to speak of what's happening now, where
Mm-hmm.
persons are finding, people are letting certain persons with no vetting with the Virgin Islands Department of Planning and Natural Resources, not the
Right.
Virgin Islands State Historic Preservation Office, not the Virgin Islands Department of Education or its Division of Cultural Education, not any of these agencies that should be made aware. If you are an archaeologist or a social scientist and you dig 1 square centimeter of soil to look for treasure or not, even if you are only a tomb raider, and I'll leave that there, then you should be documenting or at least fulfilling some type of registry. I've come to the Virgin Islands and doing research on X or on
Right.
such a property. In the event we find anything that is historic or heritage related, that will be reported. And then whatever negotiation needs to happen, there needs to be, we don't have that in place right now. I take this as an opportunity. We have agencies, we have non-profit organizations that are specializing in these areas, have scholars that have degrees up the wazoo and licenses up the yin yang that can address this. And so it's important, especially in light of this relationship that we have with the government of the United States. Because in America, you can't just dig up anywhere
No.
and move stuff. So
No.
if we're gonna be in that relationship with the U.S., then there should be some protections for what is found, whether
Yes.
people pay for $1 million an acre or 50,000 an acre, or they just get it deeded because someone's their friend and wants to give them land. You can't now just dig up the soil and use a metal detector and find things and just leave the Virgin Islands with it.
No.
I'm saying.
I mean, I just came back from Hawaii. My wife always tell me, you know how we say we came back. That was like last year. But last year when I went to Hawaii, you know how we say I just came back. But
Like the
that's
other
how,
day.
yeah, like the other day. But last year when I went to Hawaii, that was clear. When you go to Hawaii, there's big lots of signs that say, please don't touch and take the seashells. Don't touch anything. There's there's history, there's culture, there's traditions in that. And they tell you if you take it, something bad may happen to you. That's what they believe. Whether it does or doesn't, that's not relevant. The point is they're telling you don't touch and take what is not yours. And that should be, the point as well for the Virgin Islands. And that's why I do the work that I do. And that's why, like I said, I
Okay.
focus on Denmark and Norway and the Scandinavian nations. Because if you go back in the archives, Denmark used to, the Danes, the Danish kings, would often refer to the Danish West India Islands or the Danish West Antilles Islands as, the crown of their empire. That's what it's in the literature. That's what they used to say, the crown. We're the crown of their empire. That's how much wealth that these small little islands help to gain for Denmark, but also Norway and Sweden to a certain point, and Finland and Germany even. I mean, it's unreal how much wealth these small little islands, help all of those nations, if they are willing to admit what we did. And so for me, the discussion with them is that, just as you said, getting the historical documents back. And with my court case, just for those who are listening, Judge Wilma Lewis in March of this year, she gave an opinion in reference to, well, pretty much you don't have standing to bring these issues to the courts, through the judicial system. However, the U.S. attorney that brought the case, the office, they said, even though they put in a motion to dismiss, they said that you need to go to Congress. And Judge Wilma Lewis, in her opinion, the case law that she cited, the other judges that were dealing with similar cases that I didn't know about, they all said the same thing pretty much. These kind of issues, you need to go to your state legislature or to Congress. And I've been trying to get a hearing in Congress to address all of these issues with Denmark. There are folks in Congress that do know, in both political parties, that these types of issues have to happen. I hope the office of the delegate to Congress will finally write me back or say something so that I can, make some decisions as to what is going on. They haven't answered me. So it's not like, yes, we're going to try to get you to hearing. No, we're not. They just haven't done anything, which is unacceptable, because the office of the delegate to Congress is our office. The current office holder is Delegate Stacey E. Plaskett, but she can say yes, she can say no to anything. You can't force someone to do what they don't want, Dr. Chen. But the office of the delegate to Congress, when there are federal issues like this, where there are issues of human rights violations, when there are issues of that serfdom variant that both of us testified on for Queen Mary, when you have ordinances like the ordinance to prevent vagrancy and begging in the Danish West India Islands that created a system where those folks were literally, like, they were forced labor on them, which is a violation of the 13th Amendment. All of these issues need to be addressed. That's involuntary servitude. That's a violation of the 13th Amendment, which, when you look at that serfdom variant, Dr. Chen, one has to then ask, even though serfdom isn't necessarily slavery as we know it, when you start looking at what was done to the plantation laborers, especially on St. Croix, restriction of movement, they couldn't get off the plantation, contracts where they weren't really being paid. Right. They're supposed to get $1 a day, but ended up with 10 cents because the plantation owners took it. You look at the caste system, you look at the political structure where they couldn't vote. You look at all of that. It literally, to me, based on my knowledge, looking at different slavery models, from galley slavery, conquest slavery, chattel slavery, that was a system of human enslavement. What else could it have been? You understand? And Congress has to deal with that, because Congress allowed those Danish laws, like you just mentioned, to remain in place. And if you go look at some of the laws now, they still look like they're Danish laws. A lot of stuff hasn't changed,
You can look when you go to pick up something shipped to our port. And most of us aren't going to read like all of the pages and all the little 0.5 font size stuff. Me, I like to go with my little magnification sheet, because I've always wanted to be clear on what are the laws and that govern transport, import, export, all of that. And I remember bringing a vehicle here. It was a Japanese made, a Toyota. And now, mind you, it was paid for cash full, all taxes in the US. But when it came to the Virgin Islands and St. Croix, they charged me another foreign import tax, in addition to the road tax and the this, that, and the this, that, and the this, wow. that. And inside of the language on what I had to sign, and I remember when they said, you can't take a picture. I said, if I put my signature here, I'm going to take a picture. Or I'm not going to sign it. And they were like, well, then you won't get your car. I said, watch what's going to happen. Click, sign. Here you go. Yeah. And it wasn't an act of disrespect. I said, if I should be able to know and have a copy of what is that bears my signature first and foremost, and all my information and my name and my license and my background, my telephone number, where I live and everything. So everything was, I thought, copacetic. But when I started looking at the law, it was connected not only to U.S. import-export law, but to Danish. Yeah, let's pause on that moment. So yeah. I want to share something that someone just shared with us while we're talking, right? And it's actually a meme with the Honorable Asada Shakur. Okay. For those that don't know her, we're going to Google her another day. Honorable, notice I said that first. Asada Shakur. Mind you, she's been in exile in Cuba. A lot of people looking for her. But we have the global community has come together to have her exonerated. we'll come back to that at another broadcast. But I want to read what
Well,
this
then you
person.
could, before you go on, you could, the same for Marcus Garvey, Rachel
Hey,
Francis. Don't put,
hey,
you know, you're not getting in
hey,
trouble. Everybody who watching, if you don't know me, you know me now.
you can talk.
What did Marcus Garvey do? He just was being a black man speaking his mind. And if you really
I,
know the story about Marcus Garvey, like I've shared with the Jamaicans, that man is going to be exonerated. He did nothing wrong. Nothing. The same as Rachel Francis. These men and women at that time, because they were talking about blackness, and they were talking the same thing I'm talking now about how you cannot just treat people how you want. At that time, remember now, at that time, you had World War I that was coming. You had, race riots. You had all of these things. And our brother Marcus Garvey said is, listen, the same, you don't want me? That's not a problem. Let me go back to the continent. We'd probably get treated better. That's all the man was really saying. And because he said
Brown,
that, see,
Brown.
now it's like, let me stop. Because see, I don't get, you see,
No, this is good. This is a good thing. Don't stop. This is why on
because
us,
it's the same thing we're going through here
you
in
can
the
say
Virgin
this.
Islands.
But see, so that's where we're going in my, let's make sure that it stays with us because we got a little hot. The airwaves. I see Sister Stormy Gordon putting down there real talk. Deep. And this is just, we're still being pleasant.
Yeah.
These are the pleasant versions. But I want to share this quote from Assata Shakur. The rulers of this country have always considered their property more important than our lives. Unquote.
Of course.
I just needed to make sure, for those that didn't hear it in the back of the room, I'm going to type it so it's on the screen while my brother, Dr. Edward Browne, moves forward. And again, I'd like what you're sharing with us to respond to the human rights question. What you've been in, pause for a moment and ask if you think it does. And notice this is the journalist side of me. If you think it does, how does the Virgin Islands of the United States relationship with the U.S. impact the forthcoming 6th Constitutional Convention?
I mean, oh wow, that's a huge question. But Dr. Chen, we talked, and I told you from before that a lot of folks, especially younger people, weren't going to get involved in this because, the way a lot of older Virgin Islanders communicate is through the traditional radio, but younger people are talking through social media, and the discussions are not the same. And younger people in this territory and around the world, they understand a toxic relationship. And the United States, like I have said, has said, we don't want you. We want your location. And they've made it clear in hearings, everything. I mean, it's there, folks. I'm not making this up. I'm not telling you my opinion. I'm telling you facts, dates, time, and figures. They've said it. We don't want you. We just want your strategic location. That's like being in a relationship with someone and you're ready to get married to the person. You're with the person out for 10 years. You're telling them, listen, this can't work anymore. I want to be a family, have a family, be with you. And the person is telling you, no, that's never going to happen. We could still be intimate. We could have children and all that stuff. But yeah, no. I'll never put the ring. And you, that's what you want. And you decide, listen, I'm going to stay in this relationship another 20 years and hope and pray that this person who just told you they don't want you, that you're going to waste 20 years when if you have the courage to say, I deserve better. I can do for myself. I am valued. I can bring something to this relationship and find a person, because 8 billion of us on this planet, find a person who's willing to say, yes, the US is saying, no, we don't want you. And I'm willing to say, I want myself and my island and my culture and my people and my history because I'm not afraid. And that's my right. And the US knows it too. And to not do that, to have those discussions is a violation of my right to self-determination. And it was the wrong for the Danes. And that's why I come back to them so often. It was wrong for Denmark to have decided we're going to trade the people, trade the land, trade everything to the US without really putting their foot down and saying, no, we're not going to do that. That's wrong. They also have to sit at the table because all these struggles that we're in, and now we're fighting with each other about all the thousands of people who will come in, the $15 billion, they helped to create that. And they don't get the right to just walk away and say, well, that's the US. No, Denmark, Norway, no. You guys have to come to the table too and listen to how you contributed to many of these problems that we have here. But we are going to solve the problems. We're not just looking to you to solve it for us. I don't believe in that. I believe you have to come to the table and admit to certain things, give us certain things back. But we have to then preserve those things on our territorial park system, our libraries, the University of the Virgin Islands, all of these various institutions. But no, Denmark is not getting a free pass. The US is not getting a free pass. Spain is not getting a free pass to what happened to the Amerindian people. Nobody's getting a free pass. And I say that at the UN all the time. That's why some people, there's some, when I first went to the UN, Dr. Chen, just to show you, when I first spoke, they got people who got up and walked out.
Good for them. You should have said, Sakaja. I'm sorry, English. Go away.
Yeah,
it's okay.
The brothers in CARICOM and the sisters in CARICOM and the African Union, you could have seen the delegates. They could have like, who is this man coming to talk this stuff? We agree with you, but you said it. But the next year, some of those same delegates, they stopped and they listened. They didn't walk out. Because when you talk truth to powerful people and you say it in a respectable way, even though if they hurt their feelings, I'm not attacking you. I'm not attacking you, the person. I'm talking about the system that your ancestors embraced that hurt my ancestors and hurt me, because it's still hurting me. Not having the healthcare system that we're supposed to have, not having the educational system that we're supposed to have, not having the infrastructure that we're supposed to have. Those things are hurting me and my quality of life. It didn't start with me. It started somewhere, right, Dr. Chen? So I have to go to those governments and say, hey, this is what your ancestors did, man. Let's have some dialogue and conversation. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
No, but I think it's important when you say this is what your ancestors did, and let us have some conversations. I think that, and I'll just add to heal that, because what's happening is a number of people are no longer willing to engage in those conversations, or even better, the best one that comes up to me is when we see persons from the G8 primarily, and I use the Global 8 because that's most of the same people that people are still waving those flags here in the Virgin Islands. We think it's a nice thing to put up the flags of the colonizers in the 21st century. We don't seem to remember that there was an African flag that flew high, whether we want to admit it or not, but there had to be some stake for our African ancestors that held the Isle of St. John and a good part of those little islands in the 1730s, from November 23rd, 1733 to May 24th, 1734. People don't like to talk about that, but there was an African, not just a rebellion, not just an insurrection, but an actual organized, strategically planned revolution that kept the Isle of St. John, the one you hear is, even though it's the smallest, short of Water Island, it kept that 20 square miles as an independent African nation. Let's be clear. People, that's how they operated, led by royals coming out of the African. These were the first wave of Africans coming at that particular time into St. Thomas and then taking over to St. John. I think it's really important in that there is a marker that even the National Park Service has put up from this March of 2024 on the top of Rampheads. And I encourage to learn that history, that enslaved Africans just tolerated that and just went along. It's really important that we respect that.
Because of what they did on St. John, a lot of folks don't realize they were running St. John for like 6 months or so, even maybe a little bit longer. And then the Danes couldn't stop them. So the Danes called in the French and others. And then the French would then eventually use that same blockade strategy on the Haitians.
Right, exactly.
So that's how it went. They did it first on St. John. They saw how it worked. And so they knew, hey, we could blockade Haiti and no one comes in. And then we tell the Haitians to pay reparations. And that's what happened. And now we see they have Kenyans in Haiti, trying to assist the Haitians. But the Haitians are now saying, with one clear voice. Listen, we can run Haiti. We need our Haitian people to come back and be in Haiti, not in New York, not in LA, not in other places, trying to say what should be happening in Haiti, but come back and try to bring those resources and those networks to Haiti so that Haiti can prosper. And I agree with that. That just makes sense to me. And then the Kenyans can go back to Kenya and do what needs to be done in Kenya.
Mhm.
No disrespect to them coming to help the brothers and sisters in Haiti, but eventually that system can't remain in place forever.
And especially with who's bringing them there. I mean,
yeah,
you always have your allegiance to who pays you to do certain things. So it's
of course.
important that the intention that was brought forward was so that persons can stop the violence
Yes.
and to minimize not just the torture, not just the displacement, but the outright genocide of people of Haiti. At the same time, the voice of the people of Haiti that has been quelled. I mean, we need to, when you talk about in the 1700s, there was this effort to make Haiti pay reparations to France. I'd like for people to be very clear that that didn't stop till the 21st century.
21st century, just recently.
2015 to be exact.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that that's
wow.
not a nice thought process to know that there still was this annual tribute reparatory justice payment for the enslaver of a former colony that commanded, demanded, and earned its freedom again, but
Right.
then have to pay to the point of impoverishment.
That's it.
And I think again,
Doctor,
violation
I have,
against
I,
human rights. So
and I have to say that was one of the fears after the U.S. declared the Virgin Islands to be an unincorporated territory. When I go back and I look at the records, you could sense this fear that, oh my gosh, the U.S. is going to let us go. And there was a lot of discussions by leaders at that time to leave everything the same. And they petitioned members, leaders here petitioned members in Congress to just leave everything the same because they were so afraid that they would become impoverished. The island would become impoverished at the time.
right.
Again, many of them not knowing the history and the transshipment and all of these other things. And that is then, I don't judge them. I'm just saying I'm not playing along with that now.
Right.
And many of us are not playing along with that.
Right.
I can't judge their decisions. Many of them are now with the ancestors. So I can't say anything about their choice. I know I don't agree with that. And I want to be one of those who go to Congress and dialogue. There's not going to be any violence. Like we see in New Caledonia. That's a different situation. There's no reason for that. We just need to get our delegate and our leaders to create those pathways for those of us who have a different opinion. Many of my leaders here, I think they want to incorporate. They've said it, but it's not happening. It's not going to happen. And so those
America,
of us
when they don't like you, they give you a basket to carry water. Isn't that already? There you go.
They're giving us billions. That's it, Dr. Chen. They're giving us billions of dollars, and they're going to tell us, listen, we have no problem giving you billions of dollars. But in order to say you're going to impact who is going to win between Vice President Harris and former President Trump, no. We don't want that. And you can see the magnitude of that. But yet still, those of us in the territories who have to pay student loans, whatever happens, we have to face that. War breaks out with the U.S. with another nation, our people go to war. You understand? Tax laws that are changed impacts us. Food laws that are changed impacts us. Everything impacts us. But then we can't make a decision on who leads us and who leads you in 2024. Folks, think about that logic. Think about that logic.
Yeah, I think that it may be, as a Trekkie would say, illogical, right?
Indeed.
And I think it's important, right? I think it's important to raise that. As you can tell, we can easily go through the 60 minutes in seconds. And I'm grateful for all of the tidbits of wisdom, knowledge systems that you've shared with us, Dr. Edward L. Browne. I think it's phenomenal that you are able to keep all of that. I mean, you and I do this we keep our notes to this side for specific data. And I think in the future, and I encourage you, any links that you can share, just place them inside of the chat so that they stay populated with the YouTube broadcast that we'll leave up. I do wish to close, or I should say, move forward
Hmm.
with the following. Are there any other ideas, actions, programs, areas that you would like to share regarding your perspective, some of your work, your upcoming cases as they relate to our Virgin Islands community's legacy, and some of the work that we've discussed in regard to, again, how we started tonight? Are
Yeah.
Virgin Islanders afraid of free association or independence? I would love
Well,
your
yeah.
closing reflections.
Well, I would say this. I really hope that people around the world, in listening to what I'm saying, those who have access as well, because I have folks who working on it for me too. But try to help us in the Virgin Islands, those of us who want to have these hearings in Congress, because that is where it really starts for many of us who have a different perspective. Because many of our leaders here, again, for whatever reason, they're not creating those spaces for us to have these conversations, and it's not fair. It's not right. And so those of you who have, members of Congress that people that say, well, what's going on in the Virgin Islands? There are people down there who want to have conversations. It's their right to have conversations with you guys in the subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs under the Natural Resources Committee. Why aren't you guys having them talk about Denmark and these things? If folks can do that for me, I would greatly appreciate that as well.
Well, I am beyond grateful. I think it's also really important to highlight as we talk about representatives, to Congress, that we take a moment of reflection that
Yeah.
a former U.S. Congresswoman in the
Oh,
embodiment
yes.
of Sheila Jackson
Jackson.
Lee, we hold her name up in positive esteem, and may she be rejoined with the ancestors, blessed in the embrace of the Creator. I feel that she left still kind of young, in her 70s, but she gave so much
Oh, yeah.
to not only our community, but as a stalwart and as a representative in
Yes.
Congress, from very humble beginnings. And I just wanted to make sure that we gave a moment of reflection, a
Of
moment of
course.
thanks, because a lot of her presence was instrumental to many of us being able to get in beyond just the Congressional Black Caucus and get in our voices on a variety of issues. The
Yeah, and I
fact,
mean her
yeah.
last issue, Dr. Chen, was that she spoke about reparations, and
Mhm.
that was really her last big cause, her last big fight about reparations. And
Right.
she was a strong woman of African ancestry. And the truth of the matter is, and this is why I want to leave people. My spirit says to say this, as a black man, a man of African ancestry, it's important that we as black men, because black women can do it. I'm not saying black women cannot do it, but we need to stand with our sisters and fight with them. And that's part of, unfortunately, our history, where that separation has occurred because of colonialism and racism and chattel slavery and serfdom and all of these issues. But if we come together as a people, not against anybody, but to just say, you're not going to do certain things to us anymore, like Sheila Jackson Lee would often say, then we will get way further along in our development and our humanity, collective humanity.
Right. I think that's, when I hear that, I'm hearing, I want to thank you, Darmanifa Cooper,
Wow.
for highlighting, the RIP. And I always say rest in power, right? In addition to rest in peace, because I don't know how peaceful she gonna roll. She came with a little bit of fire
She did.
everywhere she was. So I
She
think even
did.
in the heavenly realm, she gonna be a little fire up in
Yeah.
there.
She and
Angelic.
John Lewis. She and
Hey,
John Lewis. Yeah, she and
hey,
John Lewis
you
created a
know,
lot of fire.
listen. It made me think of Dr. Gloria Joseph's
Yes.
publication where she had Revolutionary Retreat, and she was describing in her novel how all these revolutionaries in the heavenly realms and how they were engaging with each other on these revolutionary retreat roads. I said, my mind just expanded on that, and I hold her up. Another ancestress that's powerful beyond measure, Dr. Gloria I. Joseph, just made me think of her work on Revolutionary Retreat, and I'm always talking about African Women Lead, not my movement, but a movement that has come forth with sisters. We're on the eve of Pan-African Women's Day, July 3rd to
Yes.
1st, since 1958.
Yes.
Excuse me, correction, 1957.
Yes.
Then 1958 was when the Organization of African Unity was formed, coming out of the efforts of the Pan-African Women's Organization. So what you just said is on point. You know,
Yes.
every July 31st, we're highlighting Pan-African Women's Day. You know, there are a number of other activities within the All African People's Revolutionary Party where they do it connected to South African Women's Day, which is, you know,
Yes.
August 9th. August 9th is also World Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yes.
We know August 3rd is Edward Wilmot Blyden Day, you know, and here in the Virgin Islands and the world. I need to highlight that. We think we're doing something in the Virgin Islands, but in Sierra Leone, Liberia, West Africa, it's like
They
big,
do a
big,
lot big things. Yeah.
big thing for the Honorable Reverend Dr. Edward Wilmot
The
Blyden.
blind.
Very,
Yep.
very humble
And don't
beginning.
and don't forget. I know we see, and don't forget we have to recognize real quick, Dr. Chen. I can't go without saying this. I have to recognize Vice President Kamala Harris. I mean, if she gets the nomination, she will be the first woman of African ancestry and Asian ancestry. I think her dad is Jamaican.
Yeah,
So you know that is history. However, the outcome of the election it comes, but you know that in and of itself is historic. And hopefully, in the Virgin Islands, we'll have a first female lieutenant governor or governor in the near future.
right,
So you know, I have to give hats out to what's happening now too. So with
right.
that, you know, thank you, Dr. Chen, for everything.
It's always a joy, always a joy. Well, listen, family, you know, we went a little bit over time, so we appreciate you staying with us. You know, as you could tell, Dr. Browne and I would have easily continued this conversation just a little bit longer. And so I'm grateful that you were able to tune in and listen. I'm grateful that you were able to hear that what we're speaking about is about our liberation, around our emancipation. So with that, remember, culture heals humanity, land is our foundation,
Yes.
spiritual harmony unifies us. So we're encouraging you to join and tune in to AST Speaks Building a New Legacy whenever we're on, which seems to be more frequent than usual. So we're encouraging that. And again, I want to thank you, Dr. Edward L. Browne,
Thank you,
for
Dr.
really
Chen.
engaging that conversation. Are Virgin Islanders afraid of free association or independence? We have more to talk about on that. And with
Of
that, we'll
course.
just highlight a couple of things on this vibration of
If anything,
emancipation.
we were first, but we accept their curse. Skin and teeth feeling sweet to be developed. While we get enveloped in a globalized economy, we ain't learn, so we pay dearly for making the same mistake centuries after century. But it is not finished. Emancipation is a slow pressure cooking process. We don't measure our progress by time, but by the state of our minds, by our thinking, by the pace and rate of our linking with the land and culture of our origin. The prodigal sons and daughters of Africa are returning to their senses. We are coming to an understanding of what true emancipation is. No longer shall we be tricked by divide and rule tactics, whether Bloods and Crips, whether Hutus or Tutsis, whether BLPs or DLPs, whether Form Mugabe or MDC, whether Baldhead or Rasta, whether police or Takuma. Takuma.
This is Adrian Green out of Barbados, one of our illustrious spoken
How
word
long shall we kill our own prophets while they stand on high and look? Let not the sacrifices of our martyrs be in vain. Let us unify as one on the emancipation train. One God, one destiny, one aim.
And see, had to close with Adrian Green, because when we say one God, one aim, one destiny, and even if we invert it, you're invoking the energy of exoneration of our great ones, like Marcus Garvey, like Rothschild Francis, like Assata Shakur. We could go on with this list. There's a number of them. And we just ask for that. So with that, we say Hotep. We're grateful. If you have any questions, any comments, email astspeaks@gmail.com. Looking forward to the next time. Hotep. Blessings.